that are geared at responding to disasters and also providing mitigation. We have experienced natural disasters almost every year in form of floods and landslides that have claimed lives. Right now we are facing a disaster of the pandemic and also the locusts. The pandemic is not only afflicting Uganda but afflicting the entire humanity. Whereas disasters may not be avoided, their negative impact can be reduced depending on how we prepare ourselves. Hence the need to operationalize the contingency fund. To discuss all this and more, let me first introduce the panel that I have right here. I have Jennifer Muhuruzi, who's the Acting Treasurer, Services and Asset Management at the Ministry of Finance. Jennifer, welcome to this dialogue.
Thank you, Patrick.
I also have from the European, from the Uganda Humanitarian Platform, I have George Francis Iwa. George, welcome to the dialogue.
Thank you, and good morning, viewers.
And from Parliament, I have the Member of Parliament representing Bulisa County, the Honorable Stephen Birahwa Mokitali. Welcome.
Good morning, viewers and Thanks TV.
There are so many humanitarian agencies that are geared at helping, but one of them is Oxfam International. Oxfam is a confederation of 20 independent charitable organizations focusing on the alleviation of global poverty, founded in 1942, led by Oxfam International. It is a major non-profit group with extensive collection of operations. Oxfam works in more than 90 countries, mobilizing people to stand up against poverty. Oxfam has been in Uganda since 1960 and has since implemented humanitarian and development programs to support practical and innovative ways for people to lift themselves out of poverty. Oxfam also works with the poor communities, local organizations, volunteers, and supporters to bring about change. They believe that fundamental change will happen in Uganda with a shift in government and donor policies, implementation practices, and when citizens, particularly women and youth, are able to exercise and claim their rights and responsibilities as enshrined in the Constitution and hold duty bearers accountable. Present here today is their country director, Francis Shanti Odokorach, and it's my pleasure to invite him to give this dialogue his opening remarks and present the keynote address. Francis.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and good morning, viewers, and welcome to this program. It's my pleasure to join you this morning and to discuss with you, of course, the most important topic that we are talking about today, which is about operationalizing the contingency fund to strengthen disaster risk reduction resilience in Uganda. Patrick, to start with, I would like to say that today's economic models of the world have failed the world. It is flawed in different ways. They have been driving inequality and injustice across the regions. People are denied the ability to shape their future. Extractive economic models are driving a global climate crisis that is changing our planet forever. And remember, we have only one planet. And once we mess it up, it's so difficult for us to reverse the trend. And the impact of all of this is forcing an ever-growing number of people who are forced to leave their homes. And the impact of this, it means to them the loss of livelihoods, the loss of identity, and of course, the ever-deepening poverty in their own lives and the lives of their families. And therefore, with this conversation today, we also want to recognize the increasing frequency of both human and natural induced disasters that Uganda as a country has also been experiencing, that you've just mentioned. So we believe, as Oxfam in Uganda, that reducing the disaster risk comes not just from implementing a good humanitarian response to disasters, but more importantly, from good preparedness, mitigation, and prevention. Underpinning all of this is that everyone has a right to a just and sustainable world in which they can thrive. And that's why it's important to talk about a contingency fund that can strengthen the disaster risk resilience of the people of Uganda. So how can we enhance our humanitarian action in Uganda? I think as we plan, we must recognize the importance of working with people and communities at risk, ensuring that the people who have been impacted by the disaster are able to air out their views, and they're able to also contribute to this process of before and during and after crisis when it occurs. I would like to mention a few things. First and foremost, when people are exposed to such calamities, it's important that any action or any plan that a country like Uganda would be looking at should deliver life-saving support and assistance to communities affected by conflict and disaster, including people on the move. And of course, while respecting the people's agency while offering such relief. And I think, as we discussed today, it's also important to remember that when such a situation occurs, we should also look at transforming the system that would contribute to such fragility and also the humanitarian crisis that can impact on the communities and the people. And I also would like to say that we should also focus on the competencies of the communities so that they can be able to strengthen their own resilience to deal with the impact when such a situation occurs in their lives. There are so many, and they're always increasing. For us as international organizations and civil societies organizations and private sector, including the government as well, it's important to continue to reorient our humanitarian systems towards local leadership. We need to recognize that the community also have the capability to respond to the disaster when it occurs. They are the first responders. So as a country, I think we need to not only rely on the external support that comes, but build the capacity of the communities, of the local organizations, of the cultural institutions, and of course of the districts to be able to respond to disaster, and as well to help themselves to recover when such a situation occurs in their life. And finally, I would like to say that expanding the opportunities for those impacted to contribute their views is key when such a situation occurs in their areas. And I would like to thank you very much, and I welcome you, viewers, once again to this dialogue as we look at strengthening the contingency fund to disaster risk resilience in Uganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francis Shanti Odokorach, Country Director, Oxfam, Uganda. We thank you for your address, we thank you for your remarks, and also I thank you for your insights because you have helped us to set the stage for this discussion. Thank you so much. Now, to also try to set the stage deeper for us to understand this, I want to bring in somebody from CS BAG to make a brief presentation on the performance of the contingency fund since inception, gaps and policy recommendations. Rama Omonya, please, if you can take it from there, Rama. Is not yet ready for that, and for that matter, I'm going to be moving to my panel. All right. Earlier we had I had introduced my panel. I'm going to introduce it again as I try as much as possible to have Rama up on air and running. I have Jennifer Muhuruzi, Acting Treasurer Services and Asset Management from the Ministry of Finance, who already introduced herself. I have Mr. George Francis Iwara, the Chairperson, the Uganda Humanitarian Platform. And I also have the Honorable Stephen Bidakwa Mkitale, Member of Parliament representing Bulisa County. And Bulisa is an area that has an ongoing disaster in the form of floods as we speak, because it's within the Rift Valley and all that place that is surrounding Lake Albert from Untoroko, Bundibugyo, and Bulisa, and I suppose maybe areas of Kagadi and the other part of the Congo must be affected by the floods, which I'm told have gone quite a distance than ever before, out the lake breaking its shores. So are we able to have Rama now? Okay. All right, let me continue with the Honorable Stephen Bidakwa, because there's an ongoing disaster happening right now at Lake Albert, and but also you're a member of Parliament, and you at one point used to be in the National Economic Committee, so you're a man with a wealth of experience, the good and the bad.
Yes, I am an advocate of the contingencies fund, and in the last budget appropriation, January to March, for asking why we don't raise the money. But coming from Bulisa, the Albertine region, the Bunyoro region in particular, the water which has hit us, the water which started hitting Rwenzori Semuliki 4 months ago, and all the Lake Victoria Basin water coming from the riparian states of Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and Kenya have really caused us a disaster beyond the NEMA gazetted buffer zone. We are not talking of 200 meters around. We are talking of 3.5 kilometers of Butiaba, close to the barracks. Now, that is a submergency which was last recorded in 1960, 62. And my neighbors up to Pakwach are affected. Sometimes water has almost gone on top of the bridge in Pakwach. So the humanitarian disaster, as I did request 2.5 months ago, is now has reached a level that we should declare that disaster. I want to welcome Oxfam and other humanitarian agencies to really come to our rescue, because this water problem is now beyond just a Ugandan problem. The water is from the Nile Basin riparian states, and if we are to get any intervention downstream in Egypt, we need their consent and their preparedness to receive the water as a downstream country in the riparian states. So it's quite a challenge, and aware that we even have the budget performance challenges because of the COVID. We should look much more to bring more international intervention, both from donors and other member states of the riparian states, because this water, as you realize, is not coming from only Uganda, and it would be unfortunate. Now, for us as the Bunyoro Lake Albert area, in particular Bugungu, we happen to be the most unfortunate because we are the lowest part of the Rift Valley. We have a delta. The water from the Victoria, the Kyoga has to come to Wanseko in the delta, and the water from Semuliki Rwenzori has to come through Ntoroko again to Butiaba. We are the receiving end before we release a valve through Pakwach to Cairo. So that is the unfortunate situation we have, and you can imagine what we would have expected in the last 5 months as the immediate evacuation. We have done it on our own. What you would have requested as relief, it has not been forthcoming. So the citizens at that level have that sense of, have missed the sense of belonging. They become desperate. Now there is also, we have immigrants who even don't have where to go. Last time in Parliament, before the battle of the contingency fund, I opposed a loan in Parliament where government of Uganda was borrowing for refugees. I'm happy after 8 months, the president complained, wrote back to Parliament, and the summit was arranged for UNHCR to come in, because when you're holding a problem which is beyond just Uganda unilateral intervention, you bring in other bodies which come in. Yes, at Parliament, we have really engaged, both the Speaker and Deputy Speaker, I remember, were very passionate during the budget process on how much we should allocate in the contingency fund. But I'm also aware we are discussing the operationalization of a contingency fund when the over 40 trillion budget we did put in place as per the Public Finance Management Act. We are supposed to put the actuals, but we went back to the old budget process where we are putting estimates, because COVID hit the revenue side. COVID hit all the other sources. So we are discussing a tall order. We are discussing a situation whereby really, for us who are down there, I would have expected whatever little was in government, for us we should have received more. In the very first speech of the Prime Minister during the COVID, my request was that for us as border community, now that the border is closed, for us as the fishing community, now that night fishing is closed, and we had an extended lockdown, and now again with floods, our situation is very complex. Okay. And it requires that magnitude. So I don't want to overemphasize the need for the contingency fund. The question is, if you're dealing with floods disaster, it cannot be just a Ugandan solution.
All right, you can hold on to your point there. And the disasters are many. It's not only the floods. But before I bring you, George and Jennifer, I think it's important also to let Rama, set the stage by giving us this presentation, which would help our viewers and even us in the studio to understand the whole issue of the contingency fund since its inception, the gaps, and maybe where we've been able to succeed. Rama, you can take it from there.
Thank you, Kamara. Good morning, listeners and viewers online. My name is Rama Omonya, the program advisor for CSBAG. At CSBAG, we conducted an analysis together with our partners, Oxfam, to see how much we have operationalized the contingency funds. And the reason for this is because in 2015, we changed our budgeting architecture and came up with the Public Finance Management Act. Under the Public Finance Management Act, under Section 26, we agreed that we should at least allocate a certain percentage that we are going to see for the purposes of contingency. And I think, as the Honorable Birao has said, the prevalence of contingency of these emergencies are so frequent that we can actually today even predict them with accuracy of mathematics. Actually, people, even experts now know when, say, a landslide will happen in Bududa. We now know when, the rainfalls will come in big quantity to raise the floods. We know when the sunshine will come and then, have prolonged drought. But there are also other man-made disasters that keeps coming. That keeps coming with the time. So we have a presentation here which is looking at briefly how the contingency fund has been operationalized since 2015 when the Act came into place. But before we delve into that, just a bit of a reflection note. Whenever we plan for our budget, our fiscal framework says that we include almost every income and expenditure into our budget framework. And whereas the law, as we shall see, says 0.5%, the key question we shall be asking, which 0.5% of what? Of course, the law explains and says of the last year's expenditures that you budget for. But we also know that in our budget, for example, for 2020-2021, we have about 45 trillion. Out of the 45 trillion, we have about 7.4 trillion, which is called domestic refinancing, which is largely money, which is debt, which we keep rolling over. We can't pay. We tell the creditors we can't pay. We push it to next year. The year 2021-2022 will have about 9.5 trillion of this money. So this is not the money which is there. We also have interest payments, which is around, I think, 3.2 trillion. We also have the loan payments around 1.2. So all these kind of monies are monies which are not existent in the budget, but our budget framework captures them. So for people who always wants to talk about budget, don't think it is 45 trillion. We do not have 45 trillion. We always have, I think, around 36, 37 trillion for this current financial year running. So in the budget performance for the contingencies, we looked at, since the Act was promulgated in 2015, so that year, 2015-2016, we had the appropriated budget was 23 trillion. And we had the appropriated budget less payment of interest, which was 17 trillion if we remove the interest payments and the other monies which I talked about. But we found that there was no actual contingencies fund release, so there was zero for that year. 2016-2017, our total budget was 26 trillion. We had the amount of money available was around 19 trillion. And then again, we had zero. So that means we had a negative balance that we have to put into the contingency fund of around 11 billion, which is the 0.5 of that. 2017-2018, we had a budget of 29 trillion. and we had only about 20 trillion for the purpose of computing 0.5, and then the amount of money that was supposed to be released was 131 billion, but we also found that there was nothing released in that year. So we have a negative balance to credit into that account of 13 billion shillings. In 2018-2019, we had 32 trillion as the budget. Only 24 was available for the purposes of computation, and we had only about we had only about 145 billion to do that, but what was actually released in that year was 62 out of 145 billion. So we had a negative balance to deposit on that of around 14 trillion for that, if you cumulatively add plus the other years. 2019-2020, we had a budget of 40 trillion. And out of the 40 trillion, we had only 30 trillion available for purpose of computation. And what we were supposed to put in the contingency fund was 163 billion. But then we only put again 62 billion. And this seems to be very fixed figures. I think people in government understands why, how they came to the figure of 62. Again, we had a negative balance. For 2020-2021, we have not yet, because we have to compute what was last year, so we do not know what was, what will be put into that. But what we know is that out of what was spent last year, we need around 202 billion shillings to put into the contingency fund. So as you can see, from 2015 to 2020-2021, we have only committed 62 times 2, which is 124 billion, into the contingency fund. And this shows a serious default on our part in terms of the commitments we made in the law. So this is actually the budget performance, as you can see. So in 2020-2021, we committed 145, but we only managed 62, the same with the 2019-2020. And we're still waiting for 2020 and 2021, as we also now start planning to budget for 2021 and 2022. Next. So these are the releases from the contingencies fund in response to disasters. From 2015-16 to 2017-18, there were zeros. In 2018-2019, we had the actual releases from contingency fund. So we budgeted, we had the actual release of 40 billion, but then we only managed to utilize 37.3 billion, and then there was unspent balance of around 2.6 billion. Then in 2019-2020, we had 62, and then we spent only 68, and then there was a balance of 24 billion, which was unspent in the contingency funds. So the government has also been doing some work, of course. We do not have to think that there's nothing being done. Government has been doing quite a lot of things that we need to do, but we shall assess whether these are enough to alleviate the current challenges posed by the disasters. So the OPM settled about 258,000 new refugees, and then out of that, about 1,000 conventional travel documents were given to them. Now, somebody might want to ask, what is the relevance of this to, say, disasters? The refugees are considered the risk, the vulnerable categories, and when they come into a country like ours, it becomes, a matter of contingency that we must address. So how it is done, it is important. So all those, there were money spent in them. We also had about 65,000 seedlings were distributed for purpose of environmental issues, because these refugees, they deplete a lot of environment, the firewood they use, the poles they use for building. So we need to keep also working on it. We also had about 585 assessments were conducted in various districts to understand what is our level of risk and also preparedness. But we also had about, in 42 districts, we conducted, as a government, risk hazard vulnerability vulnerability profiling and then mapping to see where we could have possible disasters coming from. Also, the OPM conducted training for the key personnel on data collection, because data is very important in monitoring and also planning for the interventions for the purposes of the disasters. So OPM also contributed relief food and non-relief food items to the refugees and people who are displaced. In 2019-2020, the fund was also used to address disasters, especially the mudslides, the desert locusts. We all know how they came about, and then also the COVID outbreak. We know the OPM was given, I think, about 59 billion for the COVID relief, especially to provide food for that. So that wasn't budgeted for. That was part of the supplementary expenditure that just came because there was a need to address that kind of issues. So if we had the contingency fund, we would have just gone to a contingency fund and picked that money. We wouldn't have needed to disturb the Honorable Rawas with supplementary expenditures for that kind of thing. That is why it was put there. We had about 200 million, which was used for funding the consulate in Beijing. We all know what happened, that some students, Ugandan students mainly, were stuck in Beijing. They didn't have a means of livelihood in China, so we sent some money to them. Of course, there were some small skirmishes on about the amount of money that was expected and released, but the finality was 200 million was sent. There was about 5 billion that the Ministry of Health used for the awareness campaigns, for the prevention measures, especially in response to people who are infected across the country, because that's also a major intervention that was done. Now, what do we recommend? I think these recommendations are almost obvious. We have been talking about them, and we continue to talk about them. But just to flash them, we think that we need to operationalize this contingency fund as per the law. Section 26 says last year's expenditures, 0.5 must be appropriated. And like we said, these things happen every other time, and we know when they are going to happen. So why shouldn't we be doing this? Is it because we want to wait for donor to come and to our aid? I think that's always far-fetched. We also think that MOFPED should liaise with the BOU to provide a special status, full-time active bank accounts for disasters response, so that whenever this kind of things happens, we can even track the amount of money that we are releasing in real time to know how we are responding to this. We also think that the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development should ensure that funding at local government level is directed towards disaster management and preparedness and prevention. This is a key area where we find a lot of gaps, especially in terms of even having the capacity to do disaster risk analysis and all that. So we need to invest a little more at local government. We also think that the post-budget and the post-disaster budget called circular should provide guidelines for ministries, departments, and agencies and local governments on budgeting for sustainable interventions for any most recent disasters. We keep seeing this happening because once the budget call circular is done, we also think that they should have a special provision to manage, the post-disaster and have that in the circular. The OPM also should operationalize the National Disaster Preparedness and National Emergency Coordination and Operations Office Center. This is very important to coordinate the various level of interventions across government agencies. We know how hard it is to work across governments where you have issues of mandates and all that. So we think that by having this kind of center, it will be very easy to coordinate the entire operations of government. But we also think that government, Minister of Finance, should ensure that the funding at local government level is directed towards disaster management, preparedness, and prevention into this. I think also there's another thing which we didn't put here. We had a discussion about it, but I'm going to highlight briefly. We also think that, in conclusion, we think that the government of Uganda spends bulk of its disaster risk reduction investment in managing and responding to disasters, as opposed to managing and reducing the disaster risk. So we need to have a kind of a preemptive strike in the military, they would call it, to ensure that we manage the risk before they come. If we know Bududa will happen, landslide, we move people early enough so that when it happens, it doesn't cause the killings and destruction of property. We also think, we also know that there is need to understand the existing institutional dynamics and then the flows of financing resources for DRR to promote effective delivery and the use of DRR financing. So these are the bulk of the things. We have a policy brief that we have developed. We extracted this presentation from. I think they're available on our website of CSBAG and also at the website of Oxfam, and we can continue having the discussions. But we think that the other recommendation which probably we need to have is to have a conversation with the donors, especially good enough we have representative from the donor community into this. How much can the donors commit into supporting us to ensure that we operationalize this kind of funding? We know the mode of their interventions. It's also dependent on their home countries. But as a country, if we commit ours, how best can we have the donors, how best can we bring in the private sector actors to help us in this planning exercise? So Kamara, that's briefly the presentation. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you so much, Rama, that's Rama Omonya, who's the program advisor at CSBAG. We want to thank you for bringing us to speed on the performance of the contingency fund since its inception. And in fact, even you also said, which I think is very true, that some of these disasters can be predicted. There is a river, for example, in Kasese, that side called River Nyamwamba. You know, at every May or June, River Nyamwamba is going to wreak havoc in Kasese, and so is Bududa and other places. So in fact, the issue of having a contingency fund, planning and preparedness is key, and that's why I'm going to begin with Jennifer Muhurzi. I mean, really, when you prepare and you know we're likely to have issues like ABCD and we should put money there, why can't the government and the ministry put the money?
Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick, for that question that you have posed. And I would like also to thank the previous speakers who have given a good background onto what is happening in as far as the contingencies fund is concerned. But probably before we go into the discussion, I would like us to understand what this contingencies fund is and how it is integrated within the framework that we do have as a government. And if I may, I just want to say that a contingencies fund is really a reserve of funds that are set aside to facilitate possible unforeseen future emergencies or disasters, as we are discussing, and the management of risks therein. And as government, we also have a framework in the name of the Public Finance Management Act and the Constitution that we operate within to have the contingencies fund. So what normally happens is we do have a contingencies fund that is established under law, and as the previous speakers have already elaborated, that contingencies fund is we get funding which is appropriated into it, and it is supposed to be 0.5% of the previous budget excluding supplementaries. So you find that at the Ministry of Finance we have to now weigh the options of allocating resources, and remember we do have a very limited resource envelope, so we have to weigh our options very carefully as to whether we want to set aside funds and fold our hands and wait for a disaster to hit and then we go into management of that disaster, or we want to go into what we would call maybe upstream activities where we do mitigation of these disasters. So you'll find that when you do an analysis of the budget, you always find that as government we do have quite a number of unfunded priorities. Of course, priorities in quotes, as some members have been arguing that if they are priorities then they should be funded. But we normally have what we call unfunded priorities, and at the time of allocating resources, that is one thing that we normally have to deal with. Do you put the funds into the interventions, mainstream them through the various MDAs, ministries, agencies, departments, or even local governments, into their budget activities and programs, so that they can mitigate the risks of these disasters, or do we set aside the funds? So that's the challenge that we do have, and the balance that we always have to make, and hence that's why you find that we do an allocation which is not sufficient, and this is usually because of the limited resource envelope that we do have, Patrick.
All right, limited resource envelope, that's the issue. Even though when something is a priority, I mean, you know, I've picked something that is unfunded priorities, you know, it's a very funny thing, but it's true that you can have a priority but it's not funded, but then yet it remains a priority. So I'm going to ask you, George Francis Iwer, to share the perspectives of the national and local actors in the humanitarian response.
Thank you very much, Kamara, and good morning once again, viewers. I think before I even talk about the humanitarian platform, I head a national NGO. We are part of the humanitarian response, both refugee response and disasters. We've been in Bududa, we've been in Toroko, Kisoro, Kanungu, Kasese, as well as in the part of the COVID response. Now, in terms of the challenges from the perspective of the humanitarian platform, we see that the impact or the frequency of disasters is increasing. And its impact is equally increased. Whether it is a human displacement from conflict, from development induced, from climate change issues, the impact is huge. Now, this is now where the logic of the humanitarian, the contingency fund comes in. As the English say, you know, take care of the pennies and the pound will take care of itself. So that incremental addition, and I think the law is very clear that, you know, it's a priority that was envisaged in the Constitution, so put aside, because there will come a time, as COVID has shown us, that the challenge you'll be dealing with will mean that the resources you need, you might not even find. You might want to look for donors. If the donors are equally going through a crisis, they have to deal with a similar challenge.
Yes.
And you miss the opportunity to actually build a fund, you have actually kicked the problem down the road and made a big problem worse. Now, the humanitarian platform, around 2017, I think Honorable did mention his objection to Uganda borrowing, for example, for the refugee response. At that time, to realize that actually we're missing a big opportunity in terms of the local knowledge and content of, you know, local organizations, communities, you know, in addressing many of these problems. It's not only putting money at the problem that is the solution. There's many other things you can do. So the platform essentially is a mechanism for us to, first of all, talk amongst ourselves, reflect. It's a mirror for us to reflect. It's an opportunity for coordination, for ensuring that the accusations that, you know, local organizations cannot be trusted because, you know, they're corrupt, and so we reflect on that and say, no, we want to actually put mechanisms in place that we can weed this out. And I'm very happy that the NGO Bureau has actually been going through a process of, you know, streamlining, you know, so that we weed out bad apples, because we are partners in this relationship. We are part of the solution to a problem. Now,
are you suggesting, for example, the international humanitarian agencies maybe can even deal directly with the local humanitarian players on the ground? For example, in Germany from the UN, instead maybe of coming through government, because you are the people who are on the front line.
If you do cut transactional costs, remember there's not enough money to throw at the problems. So the more efficient resource utilization mechanisms you think through, the better. so that you realize more value for even less. But if you don't even have the less, like the presentation by Sisbach has shown, there has not been any accumulation whatsoever. When a problem hits you, you are starting from negative, not zero, negative. As we speak, actually our contingency fund is in negatives. That's where we're starting from. Supposing you go out to raise resources and you do not get, you have compounded the problem. Now the ideal here is, sorry, my mask is letting me down today. The ideal here is resource mobilization, first of all, guaranteed is through taxation. That's a preserve of government. Okay? If you don't have that capability of the government to raise resources, you borrow. Even governments borrow. Okay? If you are not borrowing and you're lucky, you maybe have access to endowment funds. Somebody bequeaths you. You're lucky. Or maybe the private sector will, through their social corporate responsibility, allot some of their profit to address some of these issues. If you're not doing that, you must appeal. An appeal in street language is begging. When you beg, you cannot enforce. You cannot say that, I have appealed for 10, I will get 10. It doesn't work like that. So then what do? That is why the wisdom of the Constitution and the law is that actually incrementally accumulate this. Very, very vital.
And so, the Honorable Stephen Mukitale, you are in the job of appropriating funds. You are in the job of also doing some kind of checking whether those funds have been put to effective use. As a member of parliament, you should also be thinking about how you can mitigate some of these disasters, because what I've heard from the three people, or actually four, some of them are actually man-made disasters. And just yesterday, the UN Secretary General was saying that the world is waging a suicidal war on nature. So we have try to avoid some of these disasters, but also, as a must, as Parliament, you have to appropriate the funds.
Yes, partly we plead guilty as Parliament. We were as advocates of the contingency fund right from the time of making the law. We were disappointed in the first 3 years running. Money was not coming. So as I said at the beginning, this battle involved both Speaker and Deputy to make sure that the last 2 years some money is coming in. But also, appropriation is different from release, because you can appropriate money and the release is different.
So where are the powers of appropriation? And where do the powers of appropriation stop?
As finance has rightly apologized, sometimes they have stresses. They have stresses and they reallocate this money. Of course, you'll find them coming back after 2 years, post-mortem impact, which I find very difficult to do. But I want also to take a point on the issue of how do you build resilience? How do you do using indigenous efforts? Learning from my experience, we have used our indigenous knowledge, we are trying to use our domestic resources, we are using extended families. People have gone to their relatives. An in-law comes with a daughter who went 20 years ago because it's flooded in Utiaba, so you receive her with the children. And say there is a cassava garden there, and by the God was also good. Whereas we are flooding at the lake, the other side in the cultivation area, you can put a potato heap. So it's quite so. How can we build more sustainable ways of dealing with such challenges? Apart from waiting for OPM disaster, Ichweru is, I've not seen in Women Lisa. Apart from waiting for something coming from, Bududa has been there for almost a decade.
10 years.
Why? I'm an advocate of regional governments. Why don't you have some resources within the region of Bugisu to deal with that? Mobuku case, I was still in the private sector when I knew as a logistics person, that Nyamwamba would always cross and bust Mobuku and bust all these other neighborhoods. So these things are known. Why doesn't the Rwenzori region also have a fund? But also, apart from the fund, we have indigenous knowledge about how these rivers behave, about this lake pattern. We were told as children that after some 40, 30 years, there will be a big flood. So that is indigenous knowledge. Even the roads being made by UNRWA, we had an argument. at earlier with Minister Vyandala and Vyabagam and this technical team, that if you make the Ulisa Road flat, you're going to lose it. Now, 3.5 kilometers to Tiawa and 2 kilometers to Wanseko, UNRA was about, the contractor, if Sangodi had not finished, was going to leave water, the road underwater. So there is a lot we can synergize with the local governments, with the communities. They even know which river is seasonal, which one can flood. So in absence of good hydrology records, we, like in floods, we need to work with indigenous communities, build their capacity. Cultural institutions have a lot they can do. By the way, the religious institutions, I must thank them. Most of these people have been running to churches, have lived, and yet in our budget appropriation, we have limited them. We have not given them that latitude and leverage that they can also offer that service as to the citizen. So I think for me as an advocate of national dialogue, I also think there are a lot of areas we need to rethink, that you can use cultural institutions, that local governments can do better with regional governments as opposed to running to Kampala. But the COVID also did confirm to us. You had the first president's speech, all ambulances, all government vehicles come to Entebbe and Kampala. Some of us said no. We belong to regions. Then the debate changed in the first week. Can we make every regional health center functional? We realized they were not functional. So let us look at every region. Every region has a risk, has a vulnerability, and has peculiar challenges, which we could easily adapt to, which we could easily mitigate if capacity is given. I want to emphasize the point. I want to emphasize the point of that. Where we are limited because of the resource constraint, as I said at the beginning, we should come out and say, like for the floods, this is an international problem. For the 11 riparian states, what do we do? I know, of course, we have a challenge. Uganda and Ethiopia have been working sometimes in disagreement with Egypt. Now, Egypt may also now say, I'm waiting for you. For me to accept more water in the desert, you have to speak my language. I don't want to go into that international politics, but I know it's happening. But it's better. Why do we have what we call, in the Nile Basin, you have what we call the shared vision of cooperation to avoid conflict? Because with that, you are upstream, we have water surplus. Downstream, they have water stress. So how do you benefit from that relationship? And it requires an international effort. But for Oxfam and other partners, there is really an area you can come to. I talked to Red Cross at that time when my people were saying, Honorable, where is the food? And Red Cross also had nothing. So Ugandan Red Cross has to also go to other. At that time, I even addressed the press saying, can we have other Caritas, Médecins Sans Frontières, other people, UNHCR, World Food Program. Can you come in? Because we have been that desperate.
So George, very briefly, as we conclude with this discussion right now, and I'll stay with Jennifer when I change the other panelists, because I need to know, as humanitarian response mechanism, really, you cannot be only responding to humanitarian crisis, you also have to be finding a way how to avoid them, because some of these things, like we said earlier, are man-made. The way how we are dealing with nature is hitting us back. And he's talking about a resource like River Nile. It's a transnational resource, transboundary resource. You cannot just deal with it alone without agreeing with other riparian states, especially downstream. How do you tell the people to behave in a manner that is sustainable so we don't get into trouble?
Thank you very much, Kamara. I think the starting point really here is about trust in the system. Predictability. For example, if we said we needed to have a contingency fund, which meant that from this fund, in the event of a crisis, there will be a very clear mechanism to trigger what kind of responses. Now, the trust element here is about communicating the changes that you need to bring about. But if the custodians are not following the law, you can imagine the knock-on effect. There's a lot of, not taking the law in own hand, but there's a lot of apathy as well, because if things are not working as they should be, it's a big challenge. If we took our refugee model, we are shouldering a burden for the international community. It's a burden share, okay? Now, the international community, and I might ask who is the international community if Uganda is not a member, is that this is a burden shared. The Ministry of Finance in mobilizing resources must take these kind of things into account so that now when it comes to community level disasters like, in Toroko, Bududa, the Rwenzori region, because it's about changing attitudes. It's a livelihood issue. In the Elgon region, bamboo forests have been cut and replaced with banana because of livelihood challenges. When it rains, the root structure of the banana is not the same as the bamboo. But that message takes time because that's more like it. Well, that's where the disaster risk reduction element comes in. It has to be consistent, but it has to be supported.
Okay.
So if we don't have predictability in a lot of this, it becomes very difficult. The district disaster management committees that is multi-stakeholder is not functional.
Okay.
They can't even get basic information for planning. That becomes a challenge.
All right, George Francis Iwa, Chairperson, the Uganda Humanitarian Platform, I want to thank you and appreciate your insights. And of course, Honorable Stephen Bidakwa Mikitale, MP, Bulisa County, I want to thank you and also I appreciate your insights. We're going to be taking a break. When we come back, we shall stay with Jennifer Muhurusi, because Jennifer, you're from the Ministry of Finance. I'll have another panel to join you and perhaps try to dig deep into this issue to see what government and the ministry can do, because you have a contingency fund that is so important, but yet you don't put sometimes money there. You call it a priority, and you have also added an unfunded priority. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Uganda will join the rest of the world to commemorate the International Day of Persons with Disabilities on December 3rd, 2020. The Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development will hold scientific commemorations under the theme Protect and Promote the Rights of Persons with Disabilities during COVID-19 pandemic, a call to action. National commemorations will take place at the Sheraton Kampala Hotel beginning at 8 a.m. The chief guest will be Honorable Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development. In line with the standard operating procedures put in place by the Ministry of Health to curb the spread of the COVID-19, attendance will be by invitation only. Stakeholders and the general public are invited to participate virtually. The event will be broadcast live on all the ministry's social media platforms on Zoom, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on NTV from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. To join the event, please register at and receive your login details by email. Together, let us protect and promote the rights of persons with disabilities in our communities. You can follow the conversation on #DisabilitiesUG.
has definitely been one of the most unpredictable years that we have gotten to live through thus far. Right here in the music industry, we did see a couple of big shots make it back onto our countdown, and some youngins giving them a run for their money. Now, join us every Thursday as we count down the top 100 songs of the year 2020 with yours truly, Linda Dane, Sami Gideon Metala, and MC Daggy Nice. All you have to do is follow the hashtag, #TheBeatTop100.
On the next episode,
wrong here is you coming here and getting nosy where you are not called for. My daughter is not going to be a model, even in a catalog wearing a baka. I never thought to be betrayed by my very own niece.
No, excuse me, Auntie, but I don't understand why all the indignation.
No mother wants to see her daughter half naked in front of men all going gaga.
I don't believe what I'm hearing. So that's what you think about all mothers, is that it?
Well, what's the problem, eh?
The meddling, Henda. My problem is the meddling. The risk of you changing sides. That shameless witch might change your mind and turn you against me.
I've told you not to worry, Victoria. I'm with you to the end. I want to send that woman to a place far away from here.
Me too. This is our opportunity to avenge our mother, but for that to happen, we have to be intelligent and act very calmly. Do you understand?
You don't really think it's gonna be this easy, do you, boy?
Get him!
With this regenerator, we shall turn every planet in galaxy! Yes!
Your Fridays shall never be the same again.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your girl, Itania, the life of the body.
And my name is Doggy Nice. Now listen, man. Every single Friday, nobody brings the party like we do.
That's why we are the MTV Mix Show, featuring the one and only DJ Brian, Fem DJ Dash, on a disco way.
From celebrating reggae music to celebrating Ugandan music, hip-hop and R&B, we blow up issues like nobody does. Let's bounce.
Wind the week down on the DJ Mix Show this Friday at 10 p.m. where the party never stops.
Welcome back. You're still watching this special broadcast on policy influencing dialogue and operationalization of the contingency fund to strengthen disaster risk resilience in Uganda. I have changed the panel now. We've only retained Jennifer from the Ministry of Finance, but we have been joined by two other people who will also add value into the discussion and try to understand us to make us understand where we stand and where we need to be. I have the Secretary General Uganda Red Cross Society, Mr. Robert Kwesiga. Thank you so much for joining us and you're welcome.
Thank you and good morning.
We also have from the European Commission Humanitarian Aid Office, we have Mr. John Ochoa. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
So, before I could even start hounding you who have just come, let me, I think, Jennifer, you need to, from the previous discussion, what Rama presented and what the two panelists said, I think as government, as Minister of Finance, you need to respond to them. Then we can have Robert and John join us.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. What I need to clarify is how the contingencies fund is really working in government. And one of the things that have been raised is we don't have an incremental contingencies fund, as in we don't we are operating in negatives. And I want to say that this is part of the law. And when we did the law, we said we put in the PFM Act that any appropriation without exception, which means this includes also the contingencies fund, shall expire at the end of the financial year. And as such, even in the contingencies fund, when we appropriate for the year, whatever remains is it expires at the end of the year. And what that means is any balances into the contingencies fund do revert to the consolidated fund, and then it will be now available for a new process come the new financial year. So even the issue of saying that we do have negatives in the contingencies fund for the years that we did not appropriate anything does not arise, but maybe later as we come to conclude the discussion, these are some of the issues that we'll need to really talk about. There was also an issue about about how fast we respond to some of the issues, and it was proposed that we need to have bank accounts for each of the institutions to do their to manage their disaster. But also we need to appreciate that before you can have a bank account, you need to have what to put in the bank account. And as such, we do open bank accounts, of course, following the government procedure, which is the TSA, Treasury Single Account Arrangement. And we do open these accounts, but in a very selective way. And even for the contingencies fund, when we have an institution that actually needs funding, we do open the bank account, because we know at that point we are going to transfer funds for them to be able to effectively utilize whatever funding that we have given. But I also need to point out that much as we are saying that we have been putting very little into the contingencies fund, I also want to mention that in the years where we have appropriated something into the contingencies fund, we have seen some balances also remaining unspent and being returned to the consolidated fund. So probably we need to continue engaging in dialogue and trying to understand what is it that we need to address in terms of making the contingencies fund effective in addressing these risks and disasters that we do have.
Okay, before we get the perspective from the donor perspective, let me come to you, Robert, Mr. Robert Kwesiga, Secretary General, Uganda Red Cross Society, please, to state, to tell us the state of the financing of emergency response in Uganda, because you are on the front line. I've seen your people at every disaster. They are there trying to manage the situation. You need more support than anybody else, because that's what you deal with in trying to mitigate these issues.
Yeah, thank you, Kamara, and good morning, viewers and listeners. The Red Cross enjoys a special mandate as a body established through legislation as an auxiliary authority to government. And so when you see us at the front line, we are basically fulfilling our mandate. But when it comes to the question of funding, and that's why there's a big debate, then the question is, government that gave us the mandate, how does it support us to access resources to fulfill this mandate? And that's why you find that wherever there is any emergency of whichever nature, even the government itself comes and asks Red Cross to come and intervene. But the debate which we have put up to the highest level is, for us to fulfill this mandate, yes, we can fundraise, yes, we can raise resources, but for it to be effective and sustainable, government has to chip in. My neighbor here who works for a donor agency or development partner, the challenge with these donor agencies or partners is theirs is short-term, is earmarked, and even dictated by the policy framework which is global from the headquarters. And so you can't rely on that to have an effective disaster management. And when I talk of disaster management, I'm talking of the whole cycle, from the preparedness, from the preparations, then to respond, and then rehabilitation of the people. So theirs is earmarked short-term with a lot of conditionalities. And by and large, that's what Red Cross have been relying on. And we have raised the stakes with the government that this is not sufficient. Now, but having said that, even this contingent fund, as our friend is talking, she's referring to, I think one of the key weaknesses we have is how can we invest proactively in ensuring that we predict with the right information, and now technology is there. So we are like technology is there. You can now predict and plan ahead of an emergency and see whether you can mitigate it or where you can save life when it happens. Now, that is the starting weakness of government and all of us, because we haven't put sufficient resources into that, and sort of we respond, which is an easy thing to do, but also we don't respond sufficiently, and at the end of the day, our capacities to save lives, to protect property, again, are questionable. So for me, the whole question of using the modern technology, investing in what we would call information that can help us plan. And I can tell the Minister of Finance, If you can't use the contingency fund, then factor it into the annual plans of these districts, of the other ministries or MDAs that work in those districts. But the way it is now, there is a gap. The other thing I can mention, Mr. Kamara and listeners, is we don't have a robust legal framework on how we manage emergencies, on how we manage disasters. The development of a disaster law, by the way, which is even constitutional. So you're talking of the contingency fund, but also which is constitutional, has been on the drawing board for years. And up to now, as we speak, I know there is a draft, but I wish it could be fast-tracked, because you can easily then define who does what and how are we coordinated. So to an extent now, we don't have an enabling law that apportions responsibility to each government departments or MDAs, or even actors like ourselves. Where do we come in, and how can we held responsible? But also maybe further streamlining these funding gaps we are talking about.
Okay.
Now,
yes.
Okay. I wanted to say something last, Mr. Kamara.
Yes, Robert.
Now, there are other tools which we need to adapt in Uganda. Red Cross use them, but the government also need to bring them on board. What we call like forecast financing. I'll just use an example. Like people in Teso, we know when Mount Elgon and Moroto during the rainy season, because Teso is like a basin, so all the water gathers in Teso. What are the main crops in Teso? Cassava, these tuber crops, cassava, potatoes. Of course, they get submerged, everything dies. So forecast financing is okay. So what do? Make sure that these people harvest their crops in time, make them save those crops, or create alternatives for them. But everything is lost, and we start responding, but whereas we could have done it differently and saved what they had already put in place for themselves. So tools like forecast financing, tools like giving people choice, because we still use these traditional ways, food relief.
Those are mitigation measures.
Yes. So all those we need to adapt.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert. John, in the Ugandan context, if you can give us the donor perspectives in responding to these disasters.
Thank you, Kamara. When we look at the European Commission, it's a humanitarian arm of the European Union, mandated with emergency response and disasters. So as a global donor, we look at from a bigger perspective, and all this is needs informed. So based on the needs, now priorities come in. So when we get into these priorities are also risk informed, and we have to make choices. So how we respond, for example, in the country, we look at the population influx, we look at natural disasters, and we also come into the epidemics. COVID wasn't there, but it's part of the whole epidemics that we look at. Now, generally, when we do the general outlook of the disaster response, we try to look at from the top to the bottom and look at the national level, the regional level, and also down. But coming to that level, I must appreciate the government for the open door policy to recognize the population influx, and also the incorporation of the refugee issues in the National Development Plan 3. This is an opportunity for a fair discussion and how to draw the balance. But now when we move further, we're looking at how best can we all respond to these disasters, and we look at the capacity. If these are risk informed and we have the capacities, disaster can be managed as it is. My brother Kwesiga talked about drawing the capacities, using these funds at local level. We're trying to front and have a discussion. Why don't we have the contingency plans at the district level, lower levels, with a clear threshold that we can activate the contingency plan funds that my sister is talking about. We see the challenge, and my sister shall continue conversation, that we take this money to the line ministries. But these line ministries end at Kampala level. At the district, we have local government. So at central level is managed by the OPM, lower level is managed by the chief administrative officer who is in charge of disaster management at lower levels. How does this work?
Let me ask, are you constrained by the law or by policies of government that you cannot deal directly? For example, if you have refugees in Adjumani, yes, can't you deal with a local organization in Adjumani in responding to the needs of refugees? By, you know, not necessarily giving the money to the ministry of government, and you deal with them at a local level. Can't the funders at your level do that?
We're looking at something much more sustainable, and we must work with government. We've been operating with the government alongside all these discussions. Government is involved. As I told you, the incorporation of the refugees in the National Development Plan 3 planning. This has been an extensive that started some time back. So whether we work with the Mr. Kwesiga Red Cross or we work with another donor, still we have to utilize the existing structure. And as Kwesiga talked about, the structure needs to be really streamlined. Once it is streamlined and we have the capacities down, the communities have the knowledge. They have the capability, but what triggers them not to respond to that? We need really to cascade these issues down, spelling out the triggers, having the threshold, such that the districts have even allocation of the funding. My sister, we're starting the conversation that let this go to the... We know assessors you talked about, River Nyamwamba, and it gets in. The communities know how to survive, but sometimes it goes extreme. You even ask them, what could you have done? They know it. But how can we have a local structure, cascading and investing into early warning systems, incorporating with the National Scientific Early Warning System, so that we predict in time and save lives. Early prediction and early response can save up to 8 times than just a reactive mode at the central level.
So, you know, Jennifer, for talking about floods, and Nyamwamba and other rivers now reminding me a flood, I mean, a disaster is almost waiting to happen in areas of Mbarara, and that will be water stressed. Because if you look at Mbarara, it has now been made a city. That river, which they depend on, called, I think, Ruizi, has just become a trickle. And it cannot support the entire city. Moving forward, Mbarara will be having a problem. They either have to get water from Kagera, which is a transnational water resource, or maybe I don't know, Lake Mburo. I wonder whether government in planning they are looking at that, because you have a major population with actually no water.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And I want again to re-echo the point that I've been making, and it keeps coming up. By government having a contingencies fund in place does not mean that we are not looking at the other strategies of trying to avert these risks. And we have a two-pronged approach to this whole challenge of disasters happening to us. And as the previous speakers have already mentioned, that some of these can now be predicted with accuracy, that around this time there's going to be a disaster happening because of rain, there's going to be drought because the season has not been good. But what has government done? Government has implements programs through the respective institutions, and these are the various ministries in the various sectors that we do use. If it is anything to do with agriculture, then we have to go through the Ministry of Agriculture, and they're the ones who oversee and guide on policy and direction of where we should be going. If it is anything to do with the rivers, the dams, the bridges, then we have the UNRWA who have the mandate to be able to do that. I appreciate the point where my colleagues are agitating for the point that we need to decentralize some of these interventions for them to be very meaningful and to bring home the point closer to the communities for them to intervene. But also we need to look at so many other challenges. The communities we are talking about do have some challenges, and some of these include the expertise, the experience, you know, to be able to handle some of the programs or projects that they would be doing. For instance, if Nyamwamba is going to flood and we need to have an intervention, probably what we need to do there is to do the desilting of the dams and the rivers, to make sure that we pave way for that. And then you might find that much as the community knows what they are supposed to be doing, they may not be able to handle handle that kind of activity. So that's why we mainstream some of these activities within the various institutions, and we expect that the various institutions do have strategic plans, and these are some of the issues that they look at, and that's how we channel the funding.
You know, the problem, Jennifer, is that we seem to know what we need to do. We seem to have the good intentions. We have the best plans on paper, but we're not acting on them, because when you talk about desilting, I don't think there has been a major desilting program on that river, and it kills people almost every May and every June, and you wonder why. And we have to know, why is it, you know, flooding that much? Maybe there has been a lot of deforestation on the Mount Rwenzori as much as Mount Elgon. What a major plan do we have in afforestation, and also trying to sensitize the people? Because if people are aware and people are empowered, maybe it can be one more step of trying to avoid some of these disasters that are actually avoidable.
Yeah, I agree with you, Patrick, and that's why you find that in some of the solutions to these issues that we are facing, we have to look at the causes, and one of them is what you rightly say. We have tampered a lot with the environment, and we are all paying the price globally. It's not only in Uganda, actually. So as the world, if I may use that for lack of a better word, we are paying a price for tampering with the environment.
Just yesterday,
and, even Uganda is not spared.
Just yesterday, the UN Secretary General said that the world has waged a suicidal war on nature. That what we are doing is just suicidal.
I agree with you.
So Robert, one would wonder, whereas you are doing the response, we need to know in Bududa area, what has been done to mitigate? What has been done to raise awareness? So that probably in the future, that we reduce on the risks that could happen.
Thank you very much. And I think I would even want to say that we have to take it beyond awareness and create alternatives to the people's livelihoods. So, you know, like, okay, whether you call it suicide or not, but here's a situation, someone looks at having no alternatives and is like, I live with this risk. And by and large, that's what is happening. And so, as government, or all of us who are actors in this, is what alternatives are we giving these people on top of the awareness? Because if you say awareness and you tell them this is coming, then what? And I think, I know in Bududa the government has already moved on resettling these people. But it is not only Bududa.
I remember, for example, many years ago, Robert, the Uganda Red Cross had a plan, I don't know how, I was reading about it, of building what they called flood-resistant huts in the Teso region. Probably those could help people not to migrate, to stay within, and then the water can flow without bringing down their homes.
Yeah, so there are those cases like, how do you create alternatives? Like what I've talked about, the government, what is doing in Bududa. But like in Teso, what we did, and it is documented, and it is interesting, because those pilot projects we did in Teso, the flood-resistant houses, because every day we know Teso floods. So long as Montelgon and Moruta are there, Teso will always flood. And those huts, they are proved they are resistant to floods. And so those are some of the innovations to build on, but to give people options.
When you go to Kilembe, along River Nyamwamba, near Kilembe mines, all the houses are in Kilembe, most of them were built on pillars. And because they anticipated, the people who were there then, when the mine was working, that maybe the river would burst its banks and then it would flood. You'd find every house is like a meter on a pillar. So they have to put some steps. But now we have built houses close to the shores and no pillars, nothing. No wonder we are paying the price, John.
Yes. So investing in early warning and passing out this information is very critical. But as my sister said, we need many fronts. Right. The issues of perspective that we are trying to engage, both technical and also in the conversation, is the inclusion of social protection. How can these people in vulnerable areas be risk insured? How can they be both risk informed and risk insured? So when the disasters come, there's a minimum, there's an incentive for them to move, the incentive for them to react. as a bit of a policy engagement. So the social protection discussion is moving on with Minister of Gender, and we appreciate the social registry, and this should expand to everybody. But also using other methodologies like cash-based methodologies, instant for a response, so that we could save much more sufferings and lives.
There is a comment or question that had come from Topista to all of you, and Topista is from Arua. He says, good morning, I'm Topista from Sepad, Arua. I wish to re-echo the point that disaster preparedness, prevention and response does not necessarily require finances, but building the capacity of the locals who are the victims and first responders to prevent and respond to disasters. What do you tell Topista, Jennifer?
I want to agree with Topista, and that is what we are seeing. And really, in managing these disasters, we need to have a concerted effort, and we all need to get involved. For instance, if you look at what keeps happening in Bududa, the government has tried, and we have planned some resettlements, and we even moved people away from where they are just because we know what happens there, and we predict and know that it is going to happen. So you move people from their areas, but there are those sentiments because people have grown up in those areas, so they don't tend to value these other areas where you're moving them for safety. So you find that in many cases they go back. So you find that for such now a challenge that we are facing, even after you have committed the resources, you would not need any more resources, but what you need to do is to deal with the community and make sure that they are really educated on the risks that they are going to find. So I want to agree that we need to work together as a team, as partners, and see how we can approach this monster called disasters, because I think it is affecting all of us and differently, and no single stakeholder is going to be able to address this issue that we are discussing in this room.
How are you going to address the issue of the confidence of the people of Uganda to know that whenever disasters strike, that the government is going to respond appropriately without necessarily creating an avenue for people abusing funds? Because when locusts came, in fact, the talk was, this is an avenue for people to eat money. When COVID had just started, people are saying, no, this is an avenue of eating money. So you're going to be trying to do something to respond to an issue, but there are trust issues from the people. I don't know whether you realize that.
Yeah, Patrick, I agree with you, and I think as a government we need to rebrand ourselves and also to give a chance to the institutions that are meant to really be looking at those post activities, but that cannot deter us from continuing with the goodwill and doing what we know is the right thing that we have to do. We have instituted the measures which we have put in place. We have embedded some controls in the systems that we do operate. For instance, now with the contingencies fund, you'll find that whatever funds that we do release, there is an audit that is done on these funds, and there's a transparent way of looking at the transactions, the expenditures that we do have. We have prescribed that, we have given guidelines, and we continue to rely on these systems that we have put in place, and slowly we hope that there's going to be a change even in the mindset. But otherwise, corruption and all these other vices will, they are there, and we deal with it on a daily basis.
Maybe, John, probably for you, you can be watching from a distance, that element of trust from the people. They think, well, these people, they're not here really to respond to our needs, they are here to make money. And that came very evident, was so evident during the locust invasion in northeastern Uganda. At one point, people were saying, we are looking for locusts, we can't see them here, we can't see them there. But I suppose government was releasing money, and they talk in Kampala that no way, these people just want to eat money. There's an integrity deficit in our country.
Kamara, we're working from the humanitarian perspective and the donor. We really cherish the principles of humanitarian assistance. We call upon the neutrality, the humanity, independence, and inclusion, impartiality in the whole processes. And we really, you can see the recent engagement and the previous engagement, we hold the government accountable. And whoever is getting this money, we hold them accountable. In most of the scandals, you'll see humanitarian funding is not more of that, not really mingled, especially the ECO funding, the European Commission funding. So we try to work with the team, we try to guide the team, and we also do the monitoring. We down here in the field, we're not top down and we leave the situation as it is. But it's an example to every donor. It's an example to all of us now to wake up and do things in the right way. But as we talked about, let's have the capacities more so that we distribute these risks. If it is managed at the district level, I'm sure the accountability at the district could be a little minimal. If it is managed more professional, so the capacity should go to the integrity and beyond just decentralizing issues, but also preaching much more as to the government. This is what we call upon the government on a daily basis.
Robert, I know government tried as much as possible to help the people in Bududa. At first they were relocating them to Kiriandongo, and Kiriandongo, for some of them, they felt it's a different place and it was not conducive for them. It's very different from their native Bududa. And then there was an effort, which I think is a good effort, to build them homes in a neighboring Bulambudi, I suppose.
Sure.
And the homes were built. But of course the homes, I think there were 100 plus. Probably quite a number of people were left out. I wonder what is at play as we speak in Bududa.
No, thank you. I think Bududa is still work in progress because we are involved as Red Cross. We are even helping setting up the health center. So government is putting up these residential houses and other infrastructure for services, whether schools, hospitals, I've talked about it, progressively. So I think maybe she can answer the question why government is not able to raise all the substantive monies at a go. But I know the construction is still going on and increasing on the numbers of houses and other infrastructure. But Kamara, allow me to say one thing. You see, I think in all this, whether it is Bududa or whether like what our friend from Marua talked of awareness, the public taking charge, I think one of the missing elements again is enforcement. So you must do the preparedness, you must do risk mitigation, whether it is about environment protection or what. But you see, the enforcement bit becomes a challenge. Take an example. If we know that people who do the, like you have said, we are relocated to Chigandongo, and someone comes back, then what? Then what? Because then government or all of us have a responsibility that you are playing around with people's lives and you are leaving it to them. But what extent can you say we have created alternatives for you and that's it? So I think there's that element. Now talking about the crisis of confidence, I think it is always about why do the people not trust? One has to interrogate that. Why people don't trust, and maybe it goes back into where does government invest and where does it pass on responsibility to other institutions. Just using Red Cross as an example. So if you have given us a mandate as your partners in humanitarian work, how are you entrusting us responsibility with the resources? Because we are in between. We are not government, but also the public sees us as always there for them. But if you are government, and today you are fighting all this underfunding and the rest of it, and then the public sees you coming in to implement, but you are implementing and there are gaps. And I think that's where this crisis of confidence comes from, because people are saying, but you know,
but Robert, when we talk about lack of resources, sometimes Jennifer just told us here that at some time, money has been returned to the consolidated fund. Yet actually that money is needed almost every year. How do we reach here? How can money be returned when we're so much in need?
Really, I wouldn't. Maybe she should be the one to answer that question.
Yeah, I wasn't asking you as
the question would be, why do such funds come back? Even when our friend was making a presentation that we couldn't absorb all the money set aside for the contingency. At the back of my mind was like, is this
Really?
true? All the emergencies we have. All the emergencies we have. How can we
so
not use
Jennifer,
the money?
actually, you say that because that's very hard to understand because we are looking for the contingency fund, and at one point you're returning it to a consolidated fund that it has been there, and people are crying foul. The money is not around. So
yes,
what is right and what is wrong?
I know it can be a bit confusing, but to throw some more light onto that discussion is that you find that when the funds are appropriated, when they are put in the budget, as a government, we still must work through a framework. And the PFM Act has given us the framework within which to operate. So once we have an appropriation, however small it might be, then there are some guidelines that we have to follow through with. And we have even developed guidelines to operationalize the contingencies fund, which we have shared with accounting officers. So there is a process of requisitioning for the funds, and the process starts with the accounting officer of the affected area, and we expect them to raise a requisition because fine, it is true, I might be sitting here and I know that in Bulisa there is a disaster there, the water has, the land has been submerged and all those things, but as the Ministry of Finance, I cannot again just move and allocate funds to Bulisa or the COW or through any other institution. So we know that the institution that is mandated really to deal with the disasters is the OPM. So there is a process, and we have guided, and it is very clear to the accounting officers, they have to requisition for the funds depending on when this has happened, and the funds in the contingencies fund will always be available. So they requisition, they have to put a budget and a work plan of what they are going to be doing. But then after sending that requisition, of course it goes to cabinet, and then cabinet will authorize the drawing or the allocation of funds, even in the quantities, how much should go to address a certain crisis. So once cabinet has approved that, it comes to the Minister for Finance, and then the minister will now direct the Accountant General to go ahead and release the funds. But as I mentioned, there has to be a work plan. So sometimes you find, and depending on the time for the timing for that disaster, so the accounting officer receives the funds, and this is more or less immediate. Once all this process has gone through, immediately we release the funds, and now it comes to execution. So you find that the accounting officer may not implement all the activities. The Public Finance Management Act is still very clear on the issue of funds not spent come the 30th of June. So you'll find that it requires us to return these monies to the consolidated fund. So if we release the money to the accounting officer, it expires at two levels. The first level is there's an appropriation to the accounting officer for the contingencies fund, who is the Accountant General. So by 30th June, if there is any money which cabinet has not allocated to any entity, the law is such that that money is now expiring and it goes back to the consolidated fund.
How long does it take from the position of funds and the release? Because it seems to be there's a red tape there.
Not really, Patrick, not really. It can take about a month if a disaster has happened, and
so a month,
we go through the approvals. Yes,
don't you think that is flawed? Because if there's a disaster and the process is going to take you a month for the funds to be released, does it make a lot of sense to you?
Because really we have to go within that framework. It may not make sense, but that is what the law is saying, and those are the procedures. Depending if the other stakeholders are all available, you're able to get a cabinet sitting, it is normal times, and it's not like the disruptions we have been having, you could get it even within less than that. But remember some of the interventions that even you're going to do. If somebody is sleeping outside, they are in the cold, some of these interventions now you have to find them shelter. These are some of the things that also do not happen
that's why
overnight.
I'm bothered by the reality that it could take about a month.
It could be less, or it could go up to a month.
Okay.
So once we get the funds, even when we release the funds to the accounting officer and they are not able, because even within the contingencies fund we still have to follow what the laws say. You have to go through the PPDA and all these other procedures. So they do the procurement, if it is food, if it is anything else. We are all aware of what happened during COVID. That is very recent, and we should be aware of that even when you're going through, even when it is an emergency, you still have to follow the government procedures.
Okay.
So you find that some accounting accounting officers are time barred and they are not able to spend the funds. And come 30th June, if the funds are still with the accounting officer, they return to the contingencies fund, and from the contingencies fund, they have to go back to the consolidated fund.
So John, yes, thank you, Jennifer. So John, when as the European, as a international humanitarian agency, when you give money to respond to a disaster, for example, now COVID, and beans are procured, but when they are given to people, they are not fit for human consumption. Do you have any mechanism to ask why?
We do, and we are very strict on our procurement processes. For example, the drugs, you have to follow the international standards, and it must follow the processes before. So things to do with the standards, it's our mandate.
So you do not only maybe provide the finances, but you also have to make sure they follow the recommended kind of guidelines.
Right, like the drugs, we follow the HPC. This is the global accredited procurement processes and accredited agency for the procurement. It must meet the criteria. That's why you've seen that the responses to this humanitarian financed by the international agencies has never gone so wrong. You may come and say, if it happens, it's basically recalled, and it is investigated thorough, and it's a very clear process. But just to react on Madam's, the process responding to a disaster month, that doesn't really meet our principles. The 72-hour need for the response, for the humanitarian response. So we need to discuss something much more better. So being present in the country, these are the areas of discussion, both technical and engagement to advocate. Thanks to CSBAC, thanks to Oxfam, we really join hands and we see how best can we go to ensure that the capacities are down. The government trusts the decentralization. We have a regional approach, we have a regional contingency fund, regional stock, and we're able to push and so that the government buys in and supports this, so that the districts are able to contribute minimal. They themselves first within, and we have the response unit team at that local level. We're asking. NECOC is coordination at central level. Before they even request money to the central government and the whole 1 month goes the process, they have to do the needs assessment.
Okay. So Robert, what would you propose so that they can shorten the time within which government can respond, to give the humanitarian response team the resources they need? Look, John is talking about the 72-hour. That would be ideal. But how would you? And yet, Jennifer is saying that could even go for a month, 2 months.
No, I think two perspectives. One, shared experience, but also the process which government is working on. The Red Cross has been involved in developing the disaster law. The government asked us because the disaster law was a brainchild of the International Red Cross. The government asked us to support in packaging this legislation, and it has all those elements on how you can have real-time response or even getting information. So I would say, listeners, but also through our sister, can you quicken the process of this legislation? Because it will give us that framework, and some of these constraints you are talking about, of whether it is cabinet not convening or it takes you a whole month, that legislation would address ways on how we can move fast. And the other perspective, to prove that it's possible, why does the Red Cross respond fast or appear? But I think the reality is we respond fast. So I don't want to use the word appear. It's because we have a network in every part of the country. You will have people whom we have trained as fast responders. As we speak today, in the whole country, there are over 450,000. Every corner of the country. And so, if anything happens in any part of the country, we can know on time, real time. And then that helps us to prepare to respond. And like we are working with institutions like ECO, European Union. Even now we have prepositioned stocks in various locations, so we can easily even move in fast. And so it is not working like clockwork. And why it is not working like clockwork, we need further strengthen it. One, in giving them the necessary technology such that this information can be transmitted and we process it on time. And two, to make sure that we have the mechanisms either to mitigate That means finances or respond in time. And like I said, currently we very much depend on external funding, which comes and goes, because it is intermittent as always. I know the Red Cross globally, we have what we call an emergency fund, which we easily access. 48 hours, and 48 hours is 48 hours anyway. And that's why, Mr. Kamara, you always see us there, because we normally use that as a framework. But it is not sufficient. It is not sufficient and cannot replace government or Uganda own resources. And so that needs to be done and made better. And so that's why I was saying that institutions like us who already have this kind of framework, how does government further support us to do a perfect job? How does we strengthen our collaboration with government to make it perfect? Because it is about saving lives. And I think all of us, whether a government or another person, our key principle is to make sure that Ugandans are safe and alive. Correct. And disasters, I can tell you, Mr. Kamara and all listeners, globally and in Uganda, these disasters are on the increase. They are not on the decrease. That's a fact. As we speak now, without boring with the statistics, over 76% of the global emergencies are climate related. 76% of the emergencies globally. Big economies are failing to cope. Ours here, we know most of these emergencies are than population movement, the refugees. And we don't have wars, and we are happy. But over 80 or 90% of the emergencies in this country are climate related.
But and look, Robert,
and we can predict and manage them.
Yeah, climate related.
Put the house in order.
We added about 1.2 million people on our population in terms of having refugees. And when you go in some districts, I think in West Nile, the population of the refugees has surpassed that of the host communities, which means they are working on the environment, you know, to survive on it in a manner that is not sustainable. So I wonder who is doing what, because those people who are there, they need to be there because they've run away from a problem, but the environment is going to take a hit, you know, seriously more than ever before.
It has already done so.
It has already done so. So now, who is responding to that?
You go to Western Nile, that place where the refugees are, Bidibida and all that, because we were there before even these people started coming. It was a forest. Today, you can't even see a tree, you know, standing.
But the flip side is that when you go to Ruchinga and Nakivale, John, you know, the locals would, if they want to access better health services and better education, and by the way, I'm being real, then you may find them more in a refugee settlement than outside the refugee settlement. And that is not fair, and it can cause conflict. I saw that in Nakivale.
I agree with you. Yes, the hospitals are good. The schools are well furnished in comparison, but not really too much well furnished. But we are saying that the government approach, government-led system is the best. Kamara, you're right. We find a situation where the referrals, the health center 3 is referring to health center 2 in the refugee settlement, because the humanitarian agencies are delivering with better quality medicines and approaches. But we are saying right now that even the prepositioned, even the stocks, it has to be holistic. It's now turning the other way around. One, the issue to avoid the stigmatization, where everything that happens is like to the refugees. So a balanced approach. And that's why at the beginning I thanked the government for the integration of the national development refugee issues on the National Development Plan 3.
All right. I have a couple of some comments coming in from those who have been following, and I thank you for your great company. Let me, Mulumia says, this year started with shocks including the floods, coupled with heavy rains, then locusts, and later this global pandemic, COVID-19. And he says, damn, as humanitarian key actors, is there a sustainability plan for these shocks and disasters? This is from Manafa.
I can try to...
Yes, Robert.
No, the sustainability plan is around how we strengthen the early warning systems, and these early warning systems give us sufficient information to package how to mitigate and respond. That's where it can be. Now, the other aspects are around if over 80% or 90% of the emergencies are climate related, even tying it to the refugees come, yes, but when they come, the damage they cause on the environment, I have said, then what are those measures to see that we preserve and protect our environment? That's why
afforestation and sustainable use.
Yes.
Rebecca Chomujisha says, yes, John.
Yes. We're also saying as a humanitarian response to the disaster should be done in a phased out approach. We're looking at nexus, linking humanitarian assistance to development, something we put in a build back better mechanism. And this is the thing we are preaching. This is what we are trying to talk out, and this is what we're encouraging. So that it is sustainable. The investments under the humanitarian assistance is continuously built into the development processes.
Rebecca says, my comment to all panelists, our time is also is almost finished. The challenges around relocation must be addressed. Rebecca says, people are given opportunity to relocate, but they come back to that risk area. It is that sense of home and belonging to a land and neighborhood and the people. How can this be factored in the relocation plans? This is hard, Rebecca. How can that be factored in? That attachment to the land, to a people, to a neighborhood. Like those who we saw, they went to Kiriandongo and they're like, no, this is not
home.
It. No, my quick answer will be around what makes them, you have to address what is it that is attracting them to go back to that risk area. Is there something that needs to be done where you have taken them? There is a missing link. Now, if it is about cultural attachments and people, ancestral, the tombs of the ancestors and the rest, I think that goes into what we in Red Cross we call it community engagement strategy. Then you engage the people to understand that it can't be as yesterday or as it was. But for me, I would want to tweak it with also another element. Then government has that enforcement arm.
Okay.
You see, at times you need to save people from themselves. And that arm has also to be brought in where necessary. Yeah.
All right, our time is out now. Robert, very quickly, what's going to be your concluding remark?
My concluding remark is the nature of the emergencies or disasters in this country. We know the cause. Like I've said, largely we know what causes them. And I think with a concerted effort in terms of getting the right information, using that information to inform our planning and our interventions, we can manage it.
Thank you very much.
To date, we are not doing enough.
John, your parting shot.
We would continue engaging the government in strengthening capacities for early warning systems and early response. We believe that investment in risk-informed decisions, in forecast-based financing is very important. Doing this in a cheaper, better way, promoting cash-based modalities that also promotes the economy. In a phased-out approach where humanitarian assistance contributes to the development nexus approach would be a better way to move forward so that we don't waste resources.
Jennifer, your concluding remark.
Thank you, Patrick. And as government, we want to assure the public that we are committed to making sure that we really respond to these disasters through the contingencies fund, but also we do have other measures that we have put in place, and will continue to strengthen our budgeting process to make sure that mitigation measures are embedded within the budget that we normally do. And also would like to call upon the public, because it has been very clear, it has been re-echoed by all these discussants, that 90% of the disasters in this country are caused by climate distortions. So we want to appeal to the public also to really take it within their own hands to make sure that they try to reverse the negative effects that we have impacted on the climate. Thank you.
I want to thank you so much,
The
Jennifer,
environment.
from the Ministry of Finance. I want to thank you so much, Mr. John Ochoa, from the European Commission Humanitarian Aid Office. And I want to thank you, Robert Kwesiga, Secretary General, Uganda Red Cross. All of you, we value your time. We appreciate your insights. And all of you who have been watching this program, we thank you for your great company. We know that, for example, trees and nature does not need us to survive, but we need the trees, we need the forest for us as humanity to survive. So we have to protect them. We have to use these resources in a sustainable manner. Can you imagine the Secretary General of the United Nations is saying that we have waged a suicidal war on nature? In other words, what we are doing is we have pressed a self-demolition kind of button. We need not to do that, because we need to survive not only for ourselves but for our children and our children's children. Good afternoon.